You're listening to How to 20-something, the best podcast that helps both men and women navigate their 20s and learn how to adult across all aspects of their lives. We're going to focus on career, relationships, finances, fitness, nutrition, and all of the common challenges and obstacles a typical 20-something will face in this post-college life. I'm your host, Jess Diamond, and I am the CEO and founder of Jess Diamond Coaching, where I help young professionals get their shit together, gain their confidence, and own their life. No one prepares you for this adulting world, so allow me to help you feel like you are no longer a chicken running around with its head cut off, and that you actually know what the hell is going on and what your next step to take is. Welcome to How to 20-something. Welcome back to another episode of How to 20-something, where today's topic is about being more picky. I remember I was once talking to some girl, like a literal stranger, and we were talking about dating, and I said, yeah, everyone tells me I'm too picky. And she corrected me and goes, you're not too picky. You have high standards. So if that's not a good enough reframe to tell you to be more picky, then I don't know what is. But all I'm saying is it's time to raise your own standards. In friendships, in dating, in yourself, in your career, everywhere. You're allowed to be selective over who and what you allow into your life, and that's exactly what this episode is going to highlight across these various aspects of your life. I know you already know that you want to have standards when it comes to dating, but why are we only stopping there? All of your relationships in your life impact the way you feel about yourself. So yes, friendships require standards, your job requires standards, and how you treat yourself also has its own set of standards. Now, what I will say is that everyone has different levels of standards for what they are willing to tolerate from someone else. And it's not to say they don't have self-worth. It usually means that they haven't had to raise their standards because no one has mistreated them in a way that makes them reevaluate. And it's also possible they have low self-worth. Over the last few years, I've learned to be more picky with my friendships because I keep befriending the same kind of people and be oblivious to their patterns until the pattern shows itself between the two of us. Like I constantly think, oh, but that'll never happen to us. And then it does. And with each friendship, I'm learning more and more about what I'm looking for in a friend, which also looks like knowing what red flags to look out for. Because remember, how we build any relationship is all the same. We're just so hyper-focused on romantic relationships that we forget friendships and working relationships are also the same. You need to know the red flags you want to avoid. Yes, there is the obvious, this person is just shitty. But there's also the less obvious ones, like flaking on plans, tiny lies about a story to make it more dramatic, poor response time, if they respond at all. And as I've gotten older, I've started cutting people off from the start based on how they show up because they're not going to change. Their true colors are already showing. Example being, I met this girl in the fall, and we had so much in common and really hit it off. Well, the first time we went to schedule plans, she canceled day of and rescheduled. For me, canceling day of is not cool. But if you make the effort to reschedule, then I'm still open to a friendship because life happens and I'm not some cold-hearted bitch. Well, fast forward to the plans we made a month in advance to take a half-day trip somewhere. We texted the week prior to confirm it was still happening, and the day before I texted her what time I was planning on coming over, and that's when she responded with, oh, I actually went today instead, and didn't have the decency to tell me we're not going anymore when that was supposed to take a half a day to go. So I asked her if she wanted to get lunch or something then instead, since I didn't have anything else going on, since for a whole month, that was my plan for that day. And she said she was exhausted from this trip, so no. And then never apologized or offered a new hangout. So she's gone. Not an enemy, but she'll remain more of an acquaintance. We were too new of friends for that behavior to even be somewhat tolerated. That's just not how you treat people. Or I guess that's not how I treat people. And I treat people the way I want to be treated. I have one less potential friend to invest in because I'm picky in who I open my heart to. And I want you to be able to do the same. I think the reason we don't do this is because we come from a place of scarcity and insecurity. where we want someone to like us so badly, so we're going to keep chasing something that was never meant for us. We want all the friends, so we're willing to put up with more things than not so we can have these so-called friends. When what's really happening is you're hurting your own feelings when you invest so much into this other person that wasn't interested in the first place. You've done this with dating. I know you have. And because how you do one thing is how you do everything, you're doing it in your friendships too. I take people at face value, and if you don't want to hang out with me, that's fine. I'll hang out alone, I'll hang out with my boyfriend, or I'll find someone new. But it took me a while to get to this place, and I finally got there when I was completely fed up with falling into bad friendships and learning my own standards. That maybe these people were good at first, and then they turned. Looking back, I can see that there were some red flags flying around from the get-go with some friendships that I've had, like dropping friends because newer, cooler people came around, or when drama would erupt, it would be everyone else's fault and not this other person's, or flaking on plans, or not answering texts for days, if not weeks, because no one is that busy. Raise your standards. Pick the friends who celebrate you. Like when my friend Courtney brought me these beautiful flowers an entire month after landing my TED Talk, but it was the first time we got to see each other with all of our traveling. Pick the friends who will hear you vent. Pick the friends who will pick you up off the floor when you're down bad. Pick the friends who will fully hear you out when they did something that hurt you and not turn it around and say something that you did to hurt them. I had this one friend where whenever I would bring up something that upset me, she would get upset that I told her she hurt me and then make it about her. Her perspective would be like, I hurt your feelings with the action I did, and your response is hurting my feelings, which is so not okay. And whoever you pick as your friends, carry it over into who you date. Ryan, my boyfriend, makes it so easy to come to him when he's done something that has upset me. We resolve it in 2 minutes and then we're good. It's never brought up again. The subject doesn't change. It's the two of us resolving something together. And when you develop the relationships in your life that are healthy, that both you and the other person have done the work on themselves and can effectively communicate, which also means effectively listen, you are going to only want to accept that level of treatment from everyone else. I find it's much easier to be more selective over who you date than it is who you befriend because it's more personal and vulnerable of a relationship. And it's a full partnership you are nurturing, providing you move in with them and you get married and you have a family or whatever it is that your goals are. Which is why whatever standards you've set while dating also needs to be carried over to your friends. So whichever one you're good at, carry it over to the other one. Because you don't date the person who barely responds back to your texts, or the person who never takes the initiative for plans, the person who only talks about themselves and never asks about you, the person who talks poorly about other people, the person who drops plans day of. And if you are dating people like that and chasing them because you want them to want you in return, then 1, you need to do as this episode says and be more picky. And 2, in a similar way, you need to level yourself up. You deserve better treatment than that because clearly that person does not care about you in the way you care about them. Because if that's the way they treat you, then they aren't interested in pursuing you. Believe me when I tell you this. You should never, ever, ever feel unclear or unsure with where you stand in someone else's eyes. Ambiguity means disinterest. When you don't know, you know they're not for you. And that goes for everyone. Yes, relationships take time to develop and nurture, and you aren't immediately moved to someone's top priority, but there is a level of care that should remain present across all phases of building a relationship. Dating or friends, it doesn't matter. They are one and the same, and you need to start treating them as such. Now, when it comes to your career, how HR treats you, your boss, your coworkers, the work you're doing, you also need to be more picky. If you're miserable at work, your life is going to be miserable. Point blank. It takes up so much of your time, so raise your standards. Now, I'm not saying quit your job in the same way I'm saying break off the friendships and romantic relationships that aren't meeting your level of treatment. Actually, in any of these circumstances, it's always going to work best if you do everything that's in your control first and communicate what's going on, what your experience is, and what you would like instead, and see what the other person has to say about it. Because sometimes It's a compatibility issue where you require a certain level from a relationship, and no matter how hard they try, they can't maintain that same level you require. And that's okay. I know one of my friends and her boyfriend run into this a lot, where he says something along the lines of, "It's like no matter how hard I try, it's never going to be enough." And it's true. It isn't enough, because he could very well be giving you everything he has, an absolute 100% at all times, but it only reaches about 50% of what you need. That your 100% and his 100% are not the same, no matter how hard each of you try to make it work. It's a compatibility issue, and that goes hand in hand with your standards and you allowing yourself to be more picky. Because you could love every part of this person, and it is still not going to work. You just have to be strong enough to walk away. Not necessarily because anything is blaringly wrong, but because it's never going to feel fully right. Okay, left the topic of career for a second. So coming back, I've talked a lot about your career non-negotiables in other episodes, especially in the one that talks about being unhappy from the other week, and that's kind of where pickiness comes into play overall. So you need to know yours in regards to your career and ask yourself, what are you willing to tolerate? Some good questions to ask in regards to your work and I would say in regards to all of your relationships include, what am I constantly complaining about? When do I feel drained? And what do I refuse to tolerate in my other relationships? Because just like friendships, I find that we excuse a lot of bad behavior in the workplace, especially in our 20s, since we're the bottom of the food chain and figure this is a rite of passage, when it's not. You should not be spoken to disrespectfully. My last full-time job had an HR lady. We'll call her Leslie because that's her name. And this woman was power hungry and felt like she had full say over my schedule and when I could work from home versus not. When the way my company was structured was, as long as your supervisor approved it and knew where you were, then you were good to go. Leslie didn't like that I knew she had no say over me and would treat me like shit. She would go to the VP and tell him that I'm not doing my work or I'm being toxic when I was a grade A employee, and I stand by that. Luckily, I already knew I was leaving to pursue my own business, and 6 months after I left, Leslie got fired. So, in your face, Leslie from HR. Now, I never spoke up for myself to someone other than talking back to Leslie, since she had no power over me in the way she thought she did. But if I could do it again, I would make other important people aware of the way she treated me and would single me out and lie. You're allowed to speak up for yourself, and if your company doesn't hear what you have to say, then maybe it's time to start looking for a new one. All in all, being picky doesn't mean drop everything and everyone for how you've interpreted a situation, or quit the second something feels hard. But it does mean go into a relationship with a set of standards that are important to you and walk away when it's not a good fit. Always try to communicate the changes you want to see in this partnership first. And if actions don't follow words, then you'll have your answer as to whether or not this is right for you. You're not being dramatic or unrealistic as long as you're able to decipher what feels good to you. It's about noticing when you're constantly drained, confused, anxious, or disappointed, and then realizing that those feelings aren't random. It's learning to stop abandoning yourself just to keep other people around you because you're worried of the opposite happening, having no one around you, where someone is better than no one. However, the wrong someone is not better than no one. So yes, being picky might mean you have a smaller circle, uncomfortable conversations, and walking away from relationships that aren't that bad. But it also means you're living a life that is healthy for you. And as that random stranger once told me a few years back, you're not being too picky. You have high standards, and there is nothing wrong with that. Because remember, if you're for everyone, then you're for no one. So be selective around the people you are for, and you'll be a lot happier and a lot less confused or anxious as a result. And that is how I'm going to conclude this episode of How to 20-something. So, if you liked what you heard, learned something new, are claiming your pickiness as a good thing, or know someone who needs to be more picky, then please share this episode, send it to a friend, post it on social media, and tag me at coach.jessdiamond when you do. Just do something to help me reach all the 20-somethings in the world who are navigating the most confusing decade of their life. And as always, I can't wait to be in your headphones again next week with another brand new episode.